The first thing Caleb Mercer noticed was not the woman. It was the storm chasing her. The Wyoming mountains had a way of warning people before they killed them. The wind changed first. Then the sky turned the color of old iron. By the time the snow started falling, anyone still outside had already made their last mistake. Caleb stood in front of his lonely log cabin, splitting pine with one crushing swing after another. Every strike echoed through the silent valley. He preferred silence. Silence never lied. For 5 years, nobody had climbed this mountain looking for him, and he intended to keep it that way. He stopped suddenly. Something moved beyond the trees. His hand reached for the Winchester leaning beside the chopping block. Not a wolf, not a bear, a person. The figure stumbled through waist-deep snow, fell to one knee, struggled back up, and took 3 more steps before collapsing completely. Caleb muttered under his breath. Not today. He had spent years escaping people. Trouble always wore a human face. Still, he couldn't leave someone to freeze. He forced his heavy boots through the deep snow until he reached the body. A horse lay farther down the trail, already disappearing beneath drifting snow. Dead. The traveler had walked the rest of the way. Caleb grabbed the thick wool coat and rolled the stranger over. A woman. Her lips were blue. Ice covered her eyelashes. She barely breathed. Without another word, Caleb lifted her into his massive arms. She weighed almost nothing, only frozen clothes and stubborn determination. He carried her back across the yard, while the wind screamed around them like hungry wolves. Inside, his cabin was warm enough to keep death outside. A cast-iron stove glowed in the center. One rough table, one bed. Nothing else that wasn't necessary. He placed the woman beside the fire and stripped away her frozen scarf. Her face surprised him. She wasn't delicate. Years of hard living had left their mark. Wind-burned skin, a slightly crooked nose, dark hair soaked against her face. This wasn't someone who expected rescuing. It was someone who had survived too much already. Caleb grabbed a rough towel and rubbed warmth back into her frozen hands. Minutes passed. Finally, she gasped. Her eyes flew open. Hazel, sharp, alert despite everything. She jerked backward, ready to fight. "Hold still," Caleb growled. His deep voice filled the cabin. She froze, staring at the giant standing over her. Most people stepped backward when they saw Caleb Mercer. At 6'6", with shoulders broad as a barn door and a thick black beard, he looked more like a mountain than a man. She simply studied him. "My horse," her voice cracked, "died. I know." He poured black coffee into a battered tin mug and shoved it toward her. "Drink." She wrapped both shaking hands around it, letting the heat soak into her fingers before taking a careful sip. The coffee was terrible. She still smiled faintly. "I'm Nora, Caleb." Outside, the wind slammed against the cabin hard enough to shake the windows. The blizzard had arrived. Neither of them would be leaving anytime soon. Caleb folded his powerful arms. "I've got animals to feed." She nodded. "I've got wood to split." Another nod. "I don't run a boarding house." Nora looked into the steaming coffee. "I'm not asking for one." Only silence answered. Caleb hated what came next. Helping someone for a night was one thing. Letting them stay was another. People always brought complications. Eventually they lied. Eventually they left. Or worse, they stayed long enough to matter. He pointed toward the door. "You sleep in the barn." The words landed between them without mercy. He expected tears. He expected pleading. Maybe anger. Instead, Nora slowly placed the mug on the table. "The barn? It's dry." She glanced toward the window where snow crashed sideways against the glass. "The mules are in there." "They give off heat." Caleb nodded once. "Fresh hay, too." He turned away. pretending to straighten tools hanging beside the stove. He didn't want to watch disappointment spread across her face. Then her voice reached him, completely calm. "If I sleep in that barn," he stopped moving, "I'll freeze before sunrise. You'll live." "No," her answer came instantly. "Mostly for the money I won't." Caleb kept facing the wall. "I also refuse to spend my last night on earth smelling like mule dung." Against his will. The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. Then she continued, "If I'm sleeping in the barn." He looked back over his shoulder. "You're sleeping there too." Caleb frowned. "What?" She stood carefully. Her legs still trembled from exhaustion, but her eyes never left his. "A man your size throws off enough body heat to keep two people alive." She spoke with the same practical tone someone might use discussing firewood. "We'll pile hay around us. Cover ourselves with canvas. You strip down to your long johns. I'll stay against your back. We both survive." She paused. "Unless you're scared." Caleb blinked. "Scared? Of one freezing woman." The rag slipped from his hand. For several long seconds, his mind simply stopped working. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't teasing. She was discussing survival. Pure survival. Nothing else. Yet somehow, his face grew hot. Very hot. Heat climbed up his neck until both cheeks burned. The giant mountain man who had stared down bears and blizzards without blinking suddenly couldn't think of a single thing to say. "Hi." His deep voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I ain't taking my clothes off in a barn." "Then I guess I'm staying in here." Nora calmly picked up her coffee again and sat beside the stove, as though the conversation had already ended. "Good talk, Caleb." The room fell silent. Only the fire cracked between them. Caleb rubbed one massive hand across his beard. He had just been defeated by a woman who could barely stand. He let out one long breath. "Fine." The word sounded painful. "You take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." Nora looked up with one eyebrow raised. "You sure? I thought survival came first." Caleb grabbed the thickest bear hide from the bed and tossed it toward her. "Enough talking." She wrapped herself in the heavy fur. A tiny smile appeared for only a second. It vanished before he could decide whether he had imagined it. Outside, the blizzard buried the mountain beneath endless white. Mostly, for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Mercer realized the greatest threat to his peaceful life wasn't the storm outside. It was the stubborn woman warming herself beside his fire. Morning never truly arrived. The darkness simply faded into a lighter shade of gray. Caleb opened his eyes to the sound of the fire dying inside the stove. His back protested as he pushed himself off the hard wooden floor. Across the cabin, Nora remained buried beneath the heavy bear hides, only a few strands of dark hair visible. Alive. He quietly fed fresh pine into the stove until flames filled the room with welcome heat. Routine mattered. It always had. He pumped fresh water into the coffee pot before slicing thick pieces of salt pork into an iron skillet. The smell drifted through the cabin. "Smells better than yesterday." Her sleepy voice came from behind him. Caleb glanced over. Nora was sitting up, rubbing tired eyes. She looked exhausted. Her face was pale. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Yet somehow the sharp spark inside them had returned. "It's salt pork," Caleb answered. "It tastes exactly like it smells." She laughed softly. "I'll lower my expectations." She wrapped the bear hide around herself and walked toward the stove. She stood beside him as though sharing his kitchen had always been normal. "Where I come from," she said, "a host usually asks if his guest slept well." "Where I come from," Caleb answered without looking at her, "people don't wander onto mountaintops during blizzards." I'll schedule my next near-death experience better. Despite himself, a tiny breath escaped Caleb's nose. Almost a laugh. Almost. She noticed. She pretended not to. They carried breakfast to the table. Nora ate quickly, not politely, like someone who understood food was fuel before it was pleasure. Caleb watched her for a moment. "You running from somebody?" She chewed quietly before answering. "I was married." His eyes lifted. "A mail-order marriage." She stared into her coffee. He liked whiskey. She paused. He liked gambling even more. Another silence. The bruises became easier to count than the good days. Caleb didn't interrupt. "I waited until he passed out one night. I took his horse. I rode west. The horse died yesterday." She looked directly at him. "And now I'm sitting in your cabin." Caleb slowly nodded. "You did right." Those 3 words surprised both of them. Nora blinked. "You believe that? No man gets to own another." She studied his face for several seconds. "You've seen things." "I've seen enough." Nothing more needed saying. Outside, snow buried the windows another inch. By afternoon, the storm had become impossible. The cabin door refused to open more than a hand's width. They were trapped. Maybe for days. Maybe longer. Caleb opened the pantry. He began counting every sack. Beans. Nora wrote with a piece of chalk on his small slate. Flour. She marked another line. Coffee. Another mark. Dried venison. Salt. Lard. She finished adding the numbers before looking up. If we're careful, she did the math in her head. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Caleb nodded. "No wasting food." "I understand." She placed the chalk down. "I'm not living here for free. You don't have to." "Mostly for the money." "I do." Before he could answer, she noticed his flannel shirt. 3 buttons hung by loose threads. "You sew?" Caleb frowned. "When I have to." "You clearly haven't had to for 6 months." He looked down. She was right. "Give it here. I'll fix it." "I can do it." She smiled. "But you haven't." Without another word, Caleb reluctantly pulled off the heavy shirt. Standing there in nothing but his long johns suddenly felt stranger than facing any blizzard. Nora accepted the shirt without a single embarrassed glance. She threaded the needle. Her hands moved with practiced confidence. "You've done this before. For 3 younger brothers." She smiled faintly. "They destroyed clothes faster than Mother could fix them." The room grew comfortably quiet. Only the crackle of fire filled the silence. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt shared. 4 days later, the storm still refused to end. Wind pounded the cabin every hour. The walls groaned. The roof creaked. Everything smelled of smoke, leather, and pine. That evening, Caleb found an old bottle of rye whiskey hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He poured 2 small cups. Nora accepted hers. "What's the occasion?" "Cabin fever." She raised her cup. "To surviving winter." He touched his cup against hers. "To surviving." The whiskey burned all the way down. After several quiet minutes, she asked the question nobody else ever had. "Why did you come up here?" Caleb stared into the fire. "My brother." The words sounded heavy. "We built a freight business together." He swallowed. 10 years of work. He forged my name. Sold everything. Ran away with the money. Nora listened without moving. "I found him." She looked surprised. "You did?" "In Cheyenne." "What happened?" "I realized killing him wouldn't give my life back." He looked around the cabin. "So I built this." Nora nodded slowly. "You chose loneliness." "I chose peace." "No." Her voice stayed gentle. "You chose hiding." Caleb looked up sharply. "I'm not hiding. You saved a stranger." You sleep on the floor. You fed me. You worry every time I cough." She smiled sadly. "That's not a man hiding from people. That's a man pretending he stopped caring." The words landed harder than any punch. Caleb stood. "I need air. You need honesty." He grabbed his coat and forced the cabin door open. Snow struck him like broken glass. The freezing wind felt easier than standing inside with a woman who somehow saw straight through him. The trip to the barn took half an hour. When he finally returned, ice covered his beard. He pushed open the cabin door, then stopped. Nora had cleaned everything. The dishes, the floor, his tools. Even the boots near the fireplace had been polished. "You didn't have to. I know." She handed him a warm cup of coffee. "But I wanted to." He accepted it without speaking. That evening they worked together repairing leather harnesses beside the fire. Sometimes their hands brushed. Neither mentioned it. Outside, the storm finally became quiet. Inside, another sound replaced it. A long, deep groan. Caleb's head snapped upward. The roof. A loud crack echoed through the cabin. Dust drifted from the ceiling. "The snow!" he shouted. "It's too heavy." Another terrifying crack split the ridge beam. Nora jumped to her feet. "What do we do?" Caleb grabbed an enormous timber from beside the wall. "I'm holding the roof. You drive the wedges underneath." Without hesitation, she grabbed the heavy oak wedges and dropped to her knees directly beneath the sagging beam. "Ready?" She nodded. Caleb planted both feet, wrapped both arms around the timber, then lifted. Every muscle in his massive body strained. Veins bulged across his neck. The entire cabin trembled. "Higher!" Nora yelled. "I need 1 more inch." With a roar that shook the room, Caleb forced the support beam upward. "Now!" Nora slammed the first wedge beneath the post, then another. Using a cast iron skillet as a hammer. Bang, bang, bang. The timber locked into place. Silence. The roof stopped moving. Caleb collapsed onto one knee, breathing hard. Across from him, Nora laughed through shaking breaths. "If you wanted to impress me, you could have just chopped more firewood." For the first time, Caleb laughed. A real one. Short, deep, honest. He looked at the woman sitting beneath the beam that had almost crushed them both. Without thinking, he crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. She froze, only for a heartbeat. Then she wrapped both arms around the giant mountain man. Neither of them spoke. Neither wanted to, because both of them finally understood something neither had admitted before. They had survived the storm together, and somewhere between the snow, the silence, and the stubborn arguments, neither one was facing winter alone anymore. The embrace lasted only a few seconds. Neither of them knew who stepped back first. Caleb cleared his throat. "The fire needs feeding." Nora nodded. "So does my pride." He almost smiled again. Almost. Outside, the storm finally ended. Morning sunlight burst across the snow-covered mountains so brightly it almost hurt to look at. Caleb pushed against the cabin door. It refused to move. The snow had buried nearly the entire entrance. He grabbed his shovel. "We're digging." For 2 exhausting hours, they carved a tunnel through packed snow. When Caleb finally climbed outside, the world looked completely different. Snow covered everything. The mountains looked peaceful, beautiful, deadly. The cabin roof still carried far too much weight. "I'll clear the roof," Caleb said. "You stay below. I'm helping." "You're still recovering. So are you." He knew arguing was useless. For the next several hours, they worked without stopping. Caleb tied himself to the chimney with heavy rope before pushing enormous walls of snow from the roof. Each crashing wave landed beside the cabin. Below, Nora shoveled every pile away before it could freeze against the logs. By sunset, both could barely stand. Back inside the cabin, Nora quietly removed her gloves. Her hands were raw. The skin across both palms had split open. Without saying anything, Caleb heated water. He soaked a clean cloth, then gently took both of her hands into his own. "I'm not fragile," Nora whispered. "Mostly for the money." His rough thumb carefully spread bear grease across every cut. "But leather lasts longer when somebody takes care of it." She watched him in silence. No one had ever cared for her hands before. Not once. A few days later, her body finally surrendered. Caleb heard the tin cup hit the floor. He looked up. Nora swayed beside the table. Her face burned with fever. Before she could fall, Caleb caught her. She was burning. Lung fever. The words escaped him before he realized he had spoken aloud. He carried her to the bed. For the next 3 days, he barely slept. He boiled willow bark, changed cold cloths, fed her spoonful after spoonful of bitter tea. When she drifted into fever dreams, she begged someone named Henry to stop hitting her. Each broken word tightened something deep inside Caleb. He sat beside her bed through every night, holding her hand, waiting, praying. On the 3rd morning, her fever finally broke. She slowly opened her eyes. "You look terrible." Her voice barely worked. Caleb let out the longest breath of his life. "You ain't exactly winning any beauty contests yourself." She managed a weak smile. "I owe you everything." "No." He looked away while adding another log to the stove. "You just owe me a new coffee mug." She laughed softly. "I can afford that." 3 weeks later, warm Chinook winds rolled through the mountains. Snow began melting. Water rushed through every valley. For the first time in nearly a month, the trail down the mountain opened. Caleb counted their remaining food. "Not much. I have to ride into Blackwood Gorge." "I'll come." "No. I'm strong enough." "No." She folded her arms. "You can't order me around forever." "I know." His voice became quieter. "But somebody's looking for you." She stared. "You know that?" "Mostly for the money." He loaded cured pelts onto 3 mules before sunrise. As he climbed into the saddle, Nora stood quietly on the porch. "When will you be back?" "Tomorrow." "If the mountain behaves." She smiled. "When has it ever?" He tipped his hat, then disappeared down the trail. Blackwood Gorge looked exactly the way Caleb remembered. Crowded, noisy, full of people trying to out-talk each other. He traded his pelts for flour, coffee, sugar, salt pork, then paused. "Canned peaches." The shopkeeper grinned. "Didn't know you liked sweet things?" "They're not for me." The man laughed. Caleb ignored him. As the supplies were packed, another voice drifted across the trading post. "I'm looking for a woman." Caleb slowly turned. A well-dressed stranger held a folded paper. Dark hair, hazel eyes, about 5'3". Calls herself Nora. 500 for anyone who returns her alive. Every muscle inside Caleb tightened. One of the miners asked, "What'd she do?" The stranger smiled. "Her husband wants his wife back." Caleb recognized that smile. Not law. Not justice, just hired violence. The stranger noticed Caleb watching. "You been up in the mountains?" Caleb met his eyes. "I have." "Seen anyone matching her description?" Silence filled the room. Finally, Caleb answered, "I live where bears don't bother asking questions." The stranger narrowed his eyes. Caleb calmly picked up his supplies, paid the bill, walked outside. Only once he reached his horse did he breathe again. He pushed the animals harder than ever before. The mountain trail blurred beneath pounding hooves. Darkness fell. He kept riding. Every minute mattered now. By the time he reached the cabin, the front door stood open. Caleb's heart stopped. He jumped from the saddle before the horse fully halted. "Nora!" No answer. He rushed inside. The cabin was empty. His rifle disappeared from the wall. Fresh boot prints crossed the muddy floor. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun. Nora stood in the doorway carrying an armful of split firewood. She froze. "So," she looked at his terrified face. "I guess you really did miss me." Before she could set the wood down, Caleb crossed the room in 3 long strides. He wrapped both arms around her, holding her tighter than before. She slowly rested her forehead against his chest. "What happened?" she whispered. Caleb looked into her eyes. "They found your trail." Her smile disappeared. "I won't let them take you. You don't even know if you can stop them." Caleb's jaw hardened. "I didn't spend 5 years hiding on this mountain just to lose the one person who made it feel alive again." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the last snow melted from the roof. Inside, Caleb finally understood why fate had sent a freezing stranger to his lonely cabin. She hadn't come to destroy his peaceful life. She had come to give him one worth fighting for. Far below the mountain, several riders slowly turned their horses toward the narrow trail leading uphill. The hunt had begun, but this time, Caleb Mercer wasn't hiding from the world. He was waiting for it.